I would like to introduce our next guest speaker, Jutta Eckstein. She will be talking about increasing productivity by uncovering costs of delay. Jutta is an independent coach, consultant, and trainer. She has helped many teams and organizations worldwide to make an Agile transaction. Thank you for being here, Jutta. Crowd is yours.
Thank you so much. It's really great to be here, and I think it's my first time that I do a talk outside, and that's really amazing. And to me, it feels a little bit like, you know, the ancient Greeks with the amphitheater, so also standing down there and then looking up to all of you. That's great. I love it. So, okay, so today, as we heard, so the focus is on productivity and finding out where are the costs of delay. I want to first say a few words about me, but not too many. So I work on really many different things, and I wrote about these things. So mainly I started with scaling Agile, which is now big. I did this actually in 2002. That's when I started doing it, and I wrote the first book on scaling in 2004. Then distributed Agile development was another thing. Then I do a lot with retrospectives, and I'm currently pair writing a book, and really pair writing, so every single line is written by us two together on company-wide agility. However, today I want to talk about a topic that I work with Johanna Rothman. Maybe some of you know her, and it is exactly this topic, the uncovering your costs of delay. So that's the focus today. Well, if we talk about finding out what are your costs of delay or how to increase your productivity, what you need to do first is to find out, well, what is your productivity in order to know, did the things you change really matter, and did the productivity improve? So the one topic that comes with that automatically is actually metrics. Now, metrics is really, I think, difficult task. So on the one hand, it is, well, as soon as somebody starts to measure something, well, you always know how to tweak it so it looks good. So then, what is this metric about, really? However, this only happens if you are not buying into that metric, and it is more like, well, it feels like somebody is controlling whatever somebody else is doing. And so the one thing is, a metric is a transparency about what you are doing, but if it's a controlling mechanism, then what's missing is the trust that something sensible will be done with the data. And so the most important thing about metric is that it should be clear for everyone what's the goal of measuring that thing and what will be done with the data once the data is there. Because if I don't trust the person measuring it, then I will, again, tweak it. And there's always a good way. So I thought at the time it was really a fun example. So in a large company, it was a bank actually, their quality assurance came along and said, well, we really love the unit tests. And so we want to check that everything is unit tested. So they walked around, so the typical QA people, so really typical in that sense, they didn't really touch code at all, but they just had their checks, are the unit tests there, and then of course everyone was writing assert true, true, and we had massive tests and they all passed, so we really worked great, but it doesn't help. So that's another thing, if somebody defines metrics or goals for somebody else, then that might be helpful, but you need to explain what's the rationale behind that. Or putting it the other way around, the best metrics you are having are the ones you define for yourself, because you want to learn something about yourself, which is also true for a team. If we as a team want to get better, then we might want to come up with a metric that helps us getting better. So that's kind of my, I don't know, my framing around metrics and maybe the context also for that talk. So there are different metrics that are known in the Agile world, some more, some less. And the first one I want to point out here is the velocity. Velocities are very often measured in a way like with story points. Sometimes it's the amount of stories delivered, sometimes it's the amount of tasks delivered, and there are different ways how to do that, and you then see a line like that. However, the biggest mistake that I see is that people think velocity equals productivity, and it actually doesn't. It has nothing to do with productivity. It only says, well, there is stuff that's coming out. So this is not so much helpful. Then we heard already from Rachel before, there is then cycle time. That's another thing that's often measured, and this is way more helpful if you find out like how long does it take on average from something that you plan to work on till it's actually shipped. So that's a really very helpful measure, but because compared to the velocity we had before, let me go back, you don't know how long people have worked on stories, for example. So they might have sit here for several sprints, iterations, however you call that, and then delivered at one point. But if you know how long you're really working on something, you can also tell something to your client, well, this is when you will get your next thing. However, there's still a big problem with the cycle time, because the cycle time so far says only how long does it take you to deliver the story, but it doesn't say anything per se about, is it really valuable what you're delivering here? Is it usable? Is it feasible? Maybe, because you were able to deliver it. So the key thing about if you're measuring cycle time, what you need to do as well is beforehand finding out what's the value that you plan to work on, and then once you deliver it, you know also what's the value you have delivered. So the key thing is really more on the outcome and not the output. And that's also the big difference to if you measure velocity, because velocity focuses more on, well, that's just stuff you produce. But is that stuff really helping anyone? Does it help your company staying in business, getting better? Is it helping the client? So that's the key difference here. So it's the thing about working on features that really help your customer. And I brought a quote with me, and it's really kind of special for me to present that today because, and that's really a sad part, I learned just today that he died. So that's a quote from three. That's a really, well, it was a really, really interesting person. So the one thing is his name is Roman 3, so no other name. Interesting from that point already, and I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago I had this discussion with him about the Agile Manifesto, where it says working software is the primary measure of progress. I guess you all know that. So it's one of the principles in the manifesto, and he said, well, how important is that really? If the software is working, isn't it successful customers? That's the primary measure of progress, and this is really the most powerful thing. So it's not that we were talking about, well, maybe the manifesto should change or whatever, so that's, I think, not the really important thing. The important thing is to understand what is really our job, and it's not so much just delivering stuff, it's finding out what's the most valuable thing, what's the most usable thing, and is it feasible to build it, so also that we stay in business. That brings me to something else, because if we deliver features, if we deliver stories, and if we think they're valuable, then very often we don't even know if they are used at all. You probably all heard of the Pareto Rule, the 80-20 rule, that only 20% of what you delivered will actually provide the 80% value. And so if we never learn about that, if stuff is used, then it's also not so helpful to focus on any kind of productivity increase. So what we need is actually a different way of monitoring, testing, built in the system in order to find out what is really used. And so we can elaborate on that and work on that and helping the customer, again, becoming more successful. And that's the thing that counts, and that's the real productivity. Again, it's not just any kind of stories. Again, I want to build up on what Rachel was saying in the talk just before. And that was the slide, I think she called it Water Scrum Fall. And if you now have in mind again the cycle time, where it's from when something is in the to-do state till you really deliver it, so it's done, and you deploy it, well, it's good if you measure that. However, most of the companies I'm working for, they lose their time at a different stage. They lose it much, much earlier. And so I brought an example which is actually really pretty close to one of my clients. So it's a value stream analysis where we figured what's happened when the first time, whatever kind of request, however you call that, from the market, from the business, from the customer, enters our organization. And typically it's coming from somewhere. Maybe it's sales, maybe it's somebody working with the client and bringing this back and say, well, we really should do this. And then very often this is just a few minutes. So it's like, oh yeah, cool idea, maybe we should note it down somewhere. And so this is only a few minutes. And then there is a long waiting time, like 4 weeks in that case. And then we had another hour where we had a meeting where we approved that, well, maybe it's worth looking into this thing. And then another 1.5 weeks waiting time, and then there were like 2 weeks where we talked with business, client, market, finding out what kind of stories are these actually. And then another 6 weeks till we had a 1 hour meeting with the client, and there was a sign-off with the client that, well, this is a good idea. And only then it really enters the backlog. You know, and very often what we do is we are optimizing at the final end and not where the real time is passing by. So most of the time, so in this case, I'm not quite sure, but I think you have lost already like 3 months and nothing has happened. You haven't started working on it. And if you now speed up working on it, then still your client will complain saying, well, I've asked for that thing already half a year ago or something. So we are often looking at the wrong place if we think about higher productivity. And now coming to, so this was all about metrics, so what you can measure. And the value stream is really something that's really reasonable to do. And I think you will find in every company something. So now coming to the analyzing the costs of delay was looking at some things, and the key part of that is going back to this book from Donald Reinertsen. Who has read that book? Who knows about that book? A few more hands. So I had my hand up, so I did read that book, and I have to admit it's really a tough read. It's not funny. It's very fundamental. It's really great, but it's a tough read. And I was talking about this to Johanna Rothman, and we said, maybe we should come up with a way of translating those ideas and making these more practical. And that's what this is about now. And Johanna, my co-author in that thing is, she came up with that definition of what does cost of delay really mean. And it means, I read it out, it's the way to think about the revenue you can lose plus the cost of continued development. So that's the definition here. And the thing, I guess, that comes in mind at first, at least that happened to us, was, well, if you look for everything that's work in progress or work in process, either one is is the thing that's really doing exactly that. So it's in progress, so you started working on it, so you are not making any revenue, and you keep working on it, so it's losing also money because of continuous development. So one thing that you can do, and this is actually also real data here, measuring, we had the red, yellow, green, where we said, well, red is what we need to do, yellow is what we started working on already, and green is what's done. Wow, this looks really, really bad. And we improved a little bit over time, but still, it's just bad. So normally what should happen is that the yellow bar, the stuff that's in to-do, should be really a tiny slice, because that's your biggest cost of delay. And that's what you need to focus on, to really work on a few things only, finish those, starting the next one. And of course, the thing you're working on should provide a value for your customer, and it shouldn't be just stuff. So that's the one thing you can look at. Another thing which is hard for a developer to look at, but you, as a developer, you realize the consequences, is multi-projecting. So as soon as people work on several projects in parallel, and often the idea is that, well, they're all so important and they all have to get done now. That's why we cannot say the one is number one and the other one is number two. So we work in parallel on several projects. The consequence is they'll all be later, all of them. So just this minor example, so it really is a simplified example. So if, let's say we have these 3 projects, each of them lasts 2 months. And given they are really finished after 2 months, really tiny, super simplified stuff. So if we would start working on one after the other, after the first 2 months, we could already have the revenue of the first project, right? After 4 months, we have the revenue of the 2 projects. After 6 months, of all of them. If we start working on all of them together, well, the earliest point we can get the revenue is after 6 months. So I always am surprised why this simple math is so difficult to understand, but it seems it is. And what comes on top of that, if people are working on different projects in parallel, it's also what comes with that is the task switching that's happening here. So you are not only working on one and then the other, it's also that most often the boss is coming along and saying, well, or some boss, mine is more important, stop working on this, you should work on that. And what you do is, well, no, putting it the other way around. What's happening there is actually, it's a lack of decision, and the decision is then made by the developer, because the developer just works on the thing the person is the meanest, maybe, or the hardest to say no to. So the friendly people, you probably can say no and say, well, I'm really busy, but if they are really mean, you can't say that. So it's actually, there is still a decision on a project, but it's made on a completely different place. And so that's maybe something, even as a developer, you can say, well, okay, so it means now I'm the one who decides what's the most important thing. Is that correct? And maybe then people start realizing what's going on. I mentioned already the multitasking thing. So there is, now I don't remember, I thought I made a note, but the research says, I think it's more than 30% that you are losing by switching tasks, because you have to refocus on what you are doing, and then again we are at this game, the next person walks up to you and saying, oh, can you work on this? And because it's so important, and of course everything is very important. So that's the other big problem coming with multi-projecting. Most often you have also multitasking here. I want to switch a little bit the topic about another cost of delay, which is maybe not so much there if you're really working on an agile way, which is if you're working with experts. I don't know Greece good enough. I know that in Germany, it's where I'm coming from, we have some of the shops that have changed the way how you pay. So there is only one line where you queue up, and then there are like 5 different cashiers open, let's say in the postal office or in a supermarket or in a ticketing thing, wherever you want to buy something. So there's this one line, and then 5 cashiers open, and always who is the first on the line will just get to the one cashier that just served the customer and is open again, is freed, right? So if you would work like this, it would mean that your stories you're working on are prioritized and they will be worked on in a prioritized order. However, what's often happening is that stories are prioritized, but then there are people on the team who say, well, that's not exactly what I will work on because I'm an expert in something else, and so it's probably a waste of time if I would start working on this. And same is true with 3 other people on your team. So what's happening is more what you see to your left. So first of all, the stories have been prioritized, but the way they are worked on is in a completely arbitrary way, because it might be the case that for one of the experts, a big problem is really popping up, and so everything that's lined up for that person is queuing up and up and up. So you will have a long, long queue, and you're not working really in a prioritized manner, but just in, well, bad luck because there was a problem in that one queue. So as long as you work with experts on the team, you have that problem. And at least I know from my clients I'm working with very often, we are not managing that really everyone knows everything. So having full generalists, that's really ambitious. But what I always say, your really tiniest goal you should achieve is that everyone on the team knows at least 3 things, and everything you're working on, so every technology stack or whatever you are having or business-wise, is known by at least 3 people. And you do whatever you can to broaden this even further, because otherwise it's a huge cost of delay that's happening here. Next one, quality. Well, we heard already also in the morning with the keynote address, like technical depths and so on, that could be something that slows you down. So if you're not adhering to like clean code and so on, so that might slow you down later. That's, I think, a given. However, I actually do not agree, at least not completely, with the principle 2 that Bob brought up earlier, and that was, I'm not sure if I remember it correctly, you might correct me, it was, I will build the best code I could. Something like this was number 2. I wrote it down somewhere. Is there, was it that? Very close, close enough. Okay, so that's the principle I have a little bit troubles with. And I'm happy to have a discussion later with Bob, because not always is this the thing that's required. And it's not always that makes the customer happy and successful, and it's not always that thing that keeps us in business. And I have seen actually companies also running out of business because their focus was always to make it the best code ever, which means they were always like, oh, we can't ship that because it's not good enough. But for some of the businesses, it's way more important you get out and deliver and deploy than that it has the best quality ever. So it depends on the market you're in. Of course, if it's somewhere like, and that was how Bob started, if it kills people, well, that's a different topic, of course. Then probably the customer will go out of business as well, and we too. So my point is way more like you have to look at what is really asked for, what is the customer willing to pay, what does it make sense for you as a company to survive and thrive, and from that point of view, making it as good as possible. But I think it's not a general always put the whole effort into it. Then, and another thing which I often see, which is a typical situation in Scrum, and I guess most of you have seen or heard about that. So one of the things I really dislike, and I know there are exceptions, is the definition of ready for a story. So definition of ready for a story is very close to, again, what we saw with the water Scrum fall. It's the thing that we as developers think somebody else needs to come up with a proper, in quotes, story, and only if it's proper enough we start working on it, and if it's not proper enough we throw it back over the wall and wait till it's proper enough. However, a story was always meant as a dialogue, and it was never meant that there is a person coming up with a, well, the old terminology would be a specification, so we can just take it and program it. So defining a story is a joint effort in a dialogue with the whole team, so there can't be such a thing like it's not ready for development. Well, if it's not ready, it means we need to talk more about it. We have to discuss it and find out what's missing and work together in order to do that. So there is no such thing as putting something back because it's not ready. So that's the one example. The other example that I sometimes see used in a really strange way is Sprint Zero. People have heard about that? I see you have heard about that and you dislike it like me. So Sprint Zero I often regard as an excuse for not starting. So I don't understand why can't we start right away, and even if it's so that in the first sprint our goal is to really have something very minor but it goes through the whole technology stack and shows, well, this is working, we can do it. But calling something zero, what I see there is that typically the people feel like it's not really important, it doesn't really count, we don't have to deliver, and it's more an excuse than anything else. That's kind of, yeah, what I see. Coming to another topic, which is repeating mistakes. You see the cows there because there is in the US the saying, we can't build the fence, we have to chase the cattle. Or in Germany, I know we have that saying, we can't sharpen the saw, we have to saw. I guess you have something like that in Greece too. So it's always saying like, for example, if you hear stuff like, we can't do a retrospective, we can't do TDD, we can't do continuous delivery, we can't do refactoring because we have that time pressure, we have a deadline to hit, then actually that's the reason why you should do exactly those things. That's why you should do a refactoring and TDD and continuous delivery and all of those, because as long as you're not doing these, you keep repeating the mistakes, and therefore it will slow you down altogether. Oh, I see that. I think you should give that talk, all four of you, I guess. That's really great. Yeah, so what you should do from time to time, well, just in general, all the practices, mainly the things also Rachel was pointing out, they're all an investment, but they're an investment for productivity. And if you're not investing in that, you will slow down. So maybe you can also turn it around. Sometimes you need to slow down in order to speed up. So slowing down for the investment in the practices. And I believe I have a last one here. No excuses is my title here. I guess you all have seen that picture. So that's the classic Scrum picture, and my cone came up with that. That's wonderful. And it's fine. I don't have really a problem with that picture. The problem that I'm having is that people think because that nice little parcel is at the end somehow, that there is no such thing as, for example, deploying during a sprint. But whenever something valuable is done, you should deploy it. Well, if the business says, so coming back again what Rachel said earlier, so it should be a business decision if it should be deployed and brought to the customer into the market right away, or if you want to wait doing that. But you're not waiting, deploying it just because you're in the middle of the sprint. That's, sorry, but that's just stupid. So that you are in a sprint cycle just shouldn't hinder you to deploy. So Scrum can still be a good way of working, but the picture kind of, I think, suggests that to some people, that this is, yeah, the way it should be. Okay, so I'm wrapping up here, and I think I came up with the time again. I made up the delay we had before. I want to summarize first. So what we have seen here was, on the one hand, with the metrics, they work really only if you are in a trustworthy environment. Otherwise, whatever you measure, it's just meaningless. And if you are not believing as a team in those metrics, you will not find out anything about productivity or cost of delay. So you have to believe that this is helping yourself, and it's not for somebody else who does whatever with it. So you need to have that trust in it. Then the other thing is what I refer to, it's not about delivery per se, it's about delivering value. And as long as we are not looking what the value really is that we are delivering, we are just producing stuff, and maybe the stuff is of high quality. That's good, but then probably it's not used. So looking at what does provide the value for your client, that's the thing to look for. And then the other thing was looking for the cost of delays, that what is slowing you down. Most of important, of course, work in progress, but it could be also things like the definition of ready, taking this example, or not deploying although it's ready. And so I want to finish, whoops, no, it's not. Why is this? It's slow. Now I understand. It's just slow. For whatever reason, it's very slow. Okay, so I want to close with that quote, which is, you have to release it or no one can use it, and you can't realize any revenue at all. So as long as it's not out of the door, there's no revenue. And that's, I hope, what you also saw in the picture with the multi-projecting, where this is just the case. So very, very obviously saw, well, there's no revenue. And yeah, that's the whole thing. Okay, and so this is the little, okay, this is the little book. And we have it also as an ebook, and I created a discount for all the participants here. I brought also a few copies with me in print, but in case you are interested, and I think I'm ready for taking questions then.
Thank you, Dara. Great presentation with some awesome tips. And we have 10 minutes for Q&A. Yanni?
What's your biggest challenge when you try to fix clients of
What's my biggest challenge when I try to do this with the clients? Actually, I would say the value stream, because very often the clients just think it's always the software that delays things, and they are not realizing that it's really at other places. It's kind of similar with, in the waterfall way, it was always the testers' fault because they were at the very end, and so everyone was pointing to them. They are slowing down everything, and now that we have that together, it's just still software. And well, of course we can optimize, but I think we also optimized really a lot, but not so much has happened before it comes to software. Great question, yeah.
Question over here.
So this value thing is very interesting, because it can be a touching point between all these big corporations that reallocate budgets in June for the next year, and then be agile as well, right? How does this really push one project into the other, and they do not collide, and you also have to leave them?
That's another great question. So, and you might correct me. So I understood it in a way that you can't not really be agile if you're budgeting now for the next coming year, and if something changes in the market, your money is gone because it's in a different pocket, right? Actually, this is, I know I did already enough advertising here, but it's the book I'm working on right now, so the one to the right, which is called Company-Wide Agility with Beyond Budgeting, Open Space and Sociocracy. And Beyond Budgeting is actually answering exactly that. So they're saying, and just a few words about that. Beyond budgeting is not coming from software, has nothing to do with software. It's defined by CFOs or uncovered by CFOs, so from the finance area, and they just realized, well, we cannot be flexible and adaptive enough. In one case, for example, if we do have annual budgeting, and I guess most of you have seen that, so the thing is that they uncovered, well, it's kind of obvious for all of us, I assume, that if you have that annual budgeting, and let's say I'm asking for a budget for my project, and I get the money, lucky me, I get the money, and then I find out, well, this isn't as important as I thought, so I don't need really all that money. Guess what's happening? I will spend it anyway, because if I wouldn't, I won't get the money next time when it's budgeting time. So this is bad for the company. But on the other hand as well, if I said like, this is the money I need, and now I figured that this is really much bigger and the market is really strong and it's kind of a new thing, maybe it's a disruption going on, and I would need more money. I won't get it because all the money has been distributed already in the different pockets. So again, it's bad for the organization. And exactly what you're saying, you can't be really agile so really on the corporate level, if you are allocating budgets like that. So beyond budgeting is really one of the, I think, key things that will, let's say, like synthesized with Agile, really bringing Agile to the world. Because the Agile stuff we know so far is just so technical, but there's more to it to really be Agile. Excellent question, yeah.
And one more question before we break up for lunch. We're good? Awesome. So, καλή όρεξη, bon appetit. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we will meet you back.